politics and power among states, non-states, and other actors. At one time, Europe was the center of the world. Countries will keep in mind and pursue their own national interests in international relations. Look at the world map. Which parts of the world are in our national interests and why? How does national interest change over time? There is no world sovereign to force states to obey international law. Sovereignty means foreign powers have no ability to interfere with what happens inside your own borders. Think of it this way: mind your own business. Politicians who are good at domestic politics sometimes struggle with international relations and vice versa. Think of men like Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Jimmy Carter. Power in international relations. International relations depends on power, the ability of A to get B what A wants done. Power is different from force. Force is the application of military might. Most citizens do not pay attention to foreign policy. They're geographically challenged. Power in international politics is based on a state's economic power, population, geography, leadership, and military weapons. Economics also plays a role. Economics and globalization loom large in international relations. It describes an ongoing process which regional economies, societal ideas, culture, and language all play a role and are integrated around the world. Free trade and capitalism help promote democracy and world stability. Everyone's making money. When you think about economics and international relations, think about China. Why do countries go to war? Micro-theorists in international relations state war is rooted in biology and psychology, with human aggressiveness. Macro-theorists state that war is rooted in history and geography, with the ambitions of a state for power and conquest. The balance of power theory means peace will result when military power is distributed so that no one state is strong enough to dominate others. Peace happens when several states use their power and alliances to balance each other out. Why do wars occur? Nationalism, misconceptions, global wealth, divisions between rich and poor countries. Keeping peace. How do you keep peace in a crazy international system? World government has been proposed. It's a nice idea, but states don't want to give up their sovereignty or the ability to go to war. Collective security has been mentioned, a pledge to join in economic and military action against any aggressor. This idea, though, failed with the League of Nations because it couldn't force other countries to respond if the action wasn't in their interests. It expects states to be as anxious to see others protected as they are to protect themselves. Sometimes when it comes to these things, you also have third-party assistance in keeping peace. The United Nations with peacekeepers, asking another party to come in to settle a dispute. Think about the U.S. Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt in the 1970s. The problem, though, is finding a neutral voice and must be willing to accept the assistance of third parties. Diplomacy in keeping peace. Diplomacy involves diplomatic contacts using ambassadors, working with other countries, as the U.S. tried to do and has tried to do with Iran and other countries in the Middle East. But there is nothing to stop a state from opting out of treaties they don't feel advance their interests. Peacekeeping relies on using third-party military power to enforce a peace treaty, such as the United Nations. The idea, play nice, everybody. Treaties are contracts between nations and maintain peace. They're not perfect and they can't fail. Some other tools in international politics include ambassadors, threats, economic sanctions, and war. The use of force, or the threat of the use of force, is normal in international relations. International law no longer accepts sovereignty as a cover for crimes against humanity. Think about the Nuremberg trials after World War II. The end of the Cold War has brought a new world order, changing international relations. The future balance of power may involve the return of a more complex, multipolar system, where several states and non-actors are involved. Multinational corporations, groups like Amnesty International, with competition among the United States, China, and Russia. The disappearance of a bipolar system during the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union made the U.S. the world's policeman at the end of the Cold War. In the 1990s, the world leaders wanted the U.S. to send forces to Bosnia to maintain peace. People looked at the United States as a giant 911 call center. At the same time, though, people felt the United States was pushing its weight around. The world has become less orderly in some ways since the end of the Cold War. The United Nations was created in an attempt to fix the mistakes of the League of Nations, to foster world stability, and to help solve some world problems. The UN practices collective security, and the UN has supporters and detractors. It has stopped some conflicts. It's very good at international humanitarian efforts. The problem is, with the UN, you need the goodwill of other nations to cooperate. There's no international authority. Countries like Japan and Brazil have asked why Britain and France should have permanent seats on the Security Council, why they do not. The UN's largest contribution to world peace is settling local disputes and establishing ceasefires and inserting UN troops as a buffer to separate the belligerent countries. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, known as NATO, was formed in 1949 to protect Western Europe from the Soviet Union. An attack on one NATO country was an attack on all members. With the situation regarding Putin invading the Ukraine, it encouraged Sweden and Finland, two countries that have always tried to maintain their neutrality, to join NATO for fear of Putin. U.S. foreign policy. In Washington's farewell address in 1797, Washington encouraged all Americans to stay out of the problems of other foreign nations. He said it was in the nation's interest to steer clear of permanent alliances. Washington felt this way because at this time the United States wasn't a strong, powerful country. We were weak. In 1823, President James Monroe declared for the world that we were isolationists, but also mentioned our national interests. The Monroe Doctrine warned the European powers to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, that's North and South America, and we would stay out of the affairs of Europe, Asia, and Africa. When World War I started, President Wilson called on Americans to be neutral in thought as well as in action. When he ran for re-election, he ran on the theme of, "He kept us out of war." A year later, we went to war when the Germans tried to start things up by getting Mexico to invade the United States. Wilson's goal at the end of the war was to maintain peace. The problem was the Europeans wanted vengeance and the Americans wanted the end of the war and not to be involved in world affairs. In the 1930s, the U.S. wasn't interested in the problems of Europe because of the Great Depression. The U.S. was fully committed to global affairs when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. During the war, the United States was planning for post-war peace. In 1945, our enemies were Japan and Germany, and our friends were China and Russia. By 1950, it was the reverse. The Cold War was a state of tension between the two superpowers, the United States and Soviet Union, from about 1945 to 1991. Winston Churchill used the expression Iron Curtain to describe the division in Europe between the West and Soviet bloc nations. After World War I, the U.S. became a leading free nation in the world. We supported containment in NATO, stressing the need to prevent the Soviet Union and China from expanding the territory they controlled, and supported self-determination, the right of nations to choose their own governments without outside interference. The battleground of the Cold War was the poor third world nations. The U.S. and Soviet Union provided aid to many countries to bring them under their influence. There was relative peace during the Cold War because power was balanced between the United States and Soviet Union. Each country had thousands of nuclear weapons, and one mistake could have ended the planet. The United States in a dangerous world. The Bush Doctrine described a policy the U.S. had the right to secure itself from countries that harbor or give aid to terrorist groups, which was used to justify the invasion of Afghanistan. It included a policy of preventative war, which basically says we're going to war to prevent a war. In 2003, with the invasion of Iraq, the U.S. practiced Unitarianism, doing the war our way, and really not getting enough international support. The neoconservative influence was never greater. Misconceptions and Saddam's bluff about having weapons of mass destruction led to the war. The Obama Doctrine emphasized negotiation and collaboration rather than confrontation in dealing with foreign affairs. The Trump Doctrine was very similar. Under President Biden, the doctrine has been working with the family of nations to deal with disputes and problems. U.S. foreign policy goes through repetitive phases of intervention and non-intervention. Intervention being an active involvement in world affairs and dealing with problems. Today, when we think of international problems, international relations, we think of international terrorism and those problems that occur. We think of the problems of nation building. We could nation build after World War II with Germany and Japan, but we failed in nation building with Iraq and Afghanistan. Impediments to international problems include communication, languages, words matter. Don't use the word crusade to a Muslim. Actions matter. Leaders seen as weak will be taken advantage of. Nations seek democracy because no democracy has ever fought another democracy in a war. George Kenyon once said to avoid the emotions and the extremes. Think about 9/11 aftermath. Did we do that? Foreign policy is hard because it requires not only knowing what we want to do and can do, but understand what others want and can do as well. The U.S. does not want a messy world that defies our influence, but its citizenry and leadership has little interest in putting the world into order. The big problem now is how to handle rising countries like China, dealing with people like Putin, who in many ways are irrational at times. The world does not feature rational actors, and maintaining world peace and good global relations, you have to keep that in mind in dealing with them and confronting them. Take care. Have a great day.